Hello, Make Idaho Better fans and followers. It's time for an analysis video. So this week, well, before we get into this week, real quick, bear with me. If you don't know what Make Idaho Better is already, it's the easiest way to be a part of state and local solutions. Leaders are trying to hear from you all the time, and there's not cheap, easy ways for them to do that for the most part. But we can make it a lot easier for them. So I'm trying to be the middle piece that helps leaders know what people think and helps people make their voices heard. So if you have a couple minutes a week that you can use to take a survey that'll just be delivered to your inbox, you can tell your story, weigh in with your background, experience, perspectives, and I'll bring all that data together and I'll bring it to the leaders that can do something about it on a range of topics. That sounds great. Click the Do Your Part button and join our email list. So then you'll get the surveys, and if you respond to the surveys, you'll also get the results sent to you in an email. Okay, this week we partnered with Boise Metro Chamber. So they wanted to know about Idaho air travel. In particular, they wanted to know which nonstop flights would be great to add to Boise Airport. But for any of you who don't live around Boise and use the Boise Airport, you'll be glad that I encouraged them to make this a statewide survey. So that's what we did, opened it up to everybody and asked a lot of questions relevant to the whole state. But then they paid for some sponsored questions specific to like the routes that they were thinking about. And that's the data that I analyzed today and we're going to talk about. So here's the survey page. There's always a page like this for all of our surveys you can check out. There's a tab here. You can see a copy of the survey, exactly how it went out. You can see the overall results. And there's a link to the analysis, and hopefully I can get a leader interview with the president of the chamber. And that will be posted there. So the overall results look like this. And yeah, you can see exactly kind of how many people answered different ways for all the questions. This is really great. And this is, something unique that Make Idaho Better does, because I want everybody to kind of understand these issues better, have more empathy for challenges that Idahoans are facing, and then make it, hopefully everybody has a better idea what's going on and what solutions might be. So, but these overall results are good, but they're only part of the story. So what's really valuable is when you can kind of slice and dice. So you can look at how different groups of people answered certain questions similarly or differently. And that's what I do in the analysis. So I'm not going to talk about the key takeaways. Don't want to jump the gun, but here's our table of contents. Here's where I talk about kind of how this is about showing what's below the surface with segmentation. And if there's something that you were hoping to see in this analysis and didn't see it, or you saw something valuable but wanted to look at it at a different angle, that's great. Let me know. I could do custom analysis. That's one of our paid services, and it's really affordable. It's less than 10% of the cost of these services elsewhere. Okay, and here's the link to that survey page you already looked at. So first off, let's talk about who we heard from. So we set a record this week. Congratulations, everybody. We had over 1,000 responses, first time. We had 1,171 responses at analysis time. What? That's crazy. That's so cool. And that is like, it normally costs tens of thousands of dollars for people to get that kind of survey responses, professional survey. So this is great, and this is game changing. So we beat our previous record of 822 by a long shot. So anyway, here we're going to talk about kind of who took the survey, so that you got to keep that in the back of your mind as we're like reasoning about answers and what they mean. It's always good to know, like, do we hear from a certain type of person? So like maybe this isn't like what an average Idahoan would be thinking, or vice versa. So we heard almost fairly even on gender, definitely more women than men. Pretty good spread here on ages, all the way from somebody in their teens, and somebody in their 90s. First time I had somebody that's over 90. I'm excited about that. And then, yeah, we're pretty evenly spread between, 20s and less on the 70s. But this is good. And then counties, we had not quite 700 from Ada County, but definitely the most from Ada County. We normally have the most from Ada County, but not this heavily. Part of the reason for that is that the Boise Metro Chamber helped promote this survey among all their members to get participation. So we promoted across the state as we always do, but they were extra effective in Ada County. Anyways, let's kick things off with some context. So again, this is a survey about Idaho air travel, but we're not limiting it to Boise, so I wanted to make it generalized so like we can reason about Idaho air travel across the entire state. So the most important context with that is, what's your main airport? Where do you fly out of most often? And Boise airport is about 70%, but we had people from all of these kind of airport options from inside Idaho to Montana, Utah, Washington. So because sometimes that's the closest one, is you got crossing the border to get to one of those is better than driving further inside Idaho. So that's good to know. Then another thing I wanted to know was like, how often do you end up driving when you would have flown if the route existed? Like, for instance, so I live in Boise, and I always drive to McCall and Sun Valley. It's not that far, and I wouldn't probably pay to fly there under really any circumstances, but I definitely don't want to drive to Coeur d'Alene if I want to go there for a weekend. I would rather fly. But I don't go to Coeur d'Alene that often, maybe a couple times in the last like 5 years. So I probably would be in this less than yearly area. But the biggest answer here being quarterly and yearly or more often, like this is a regular thing for a lot of people in Idaho. So that's really interesting. And I wanted to see if that was different based on the airport that you use, because maybe some airports don't have very good Idaho flight options, so you just end up driving halfway across the state. So when I looked at this, some things that jumped out to me is, more red means you basically drive instead of flying more often when you would have flown if you could. And that's definitely almost, it's 50% or more for most airports here, like showing that that's happening on, often, at least on a quarterly basis. But Boise Airport is kind of, this is happening the least often of these like top airports that we looked at, and then I averaged the other airports. So it's about 65% that are kind of driving instead of flying on a yearly basis, but it's only 40% that are doing it on a quarterly basis or more often. That's quite a bit better than everybody else. Twin Falls is getting close to that, but I'm guessing that either people in Boise are going further, so they're mostly traveling to, Seattle, Portland, New York, whatever. They're going kind of outside the state more often than other parts of other airports, or there's just more flight options from Boise. So when you do travel within the state, you take advantage of the flights. So that's my take on that so far. So then I wanted to ask kind of how much of your travel is business related. That's some good context, because if you fly a lot for business, you might think differently about flights and convenience than people that do it for vacation or personal reasons. So that's what I wanted to look at it for that reason. We're going to use this later on in the analysis, but we kind of got two popular answers here. Most of the travel is for business, and none of the travel is for business. And then everybody else is kind of in between here. So we're definitely looking at almost 80%, over 3/4 that are doing business travel. And then, this is probably roughly 50%, that are doing it half or more. And then I wanted to check that by airport, see if there's like certain airports are doing more business related travel or not. And there wasn't. Boise, Salt Lake, Twin Falls, and the other airports, their proportions on kind of how much business travel, darker brown meaning like basically like higher proportion, and lighter meaning lower proportion or none. There wasn't a whole lot of difference in them, but there was Idaho Falls and Spokane kind of stood out to me. So Idaho Falls had a higher percentage of business travel from the respondents we heard from, and Spokane had less. So, this tan area is much bigger than the rest. And for Idaho Falls, this kind of dark brown areas are much bigger than the rest. So I have an explanation, I think, or a theory on Idaho Falls. I don't know about Spokane. I think maybe that just might be the kind of luck of the draw, not hearing from tons of people that fly out of Spokane. But with Idaho Falls, I know that the Boise Metro Chamber shared the survey with the Idaho Falls Chamber. So if the Idaho Falls Chamber kind of distributed the survey among members, it's most likely to be these kind of business types that participated. That's why I think probably, I don't know if other chambers got the survey sent to them and if they distributed it or not, but I'm pretty sure, I know that it was sent to Idaho Falls and they probably distributed. So that's why I think it looks like that. I don't think Idaho Falls per se across everybody is doing more business travel. I don't have a read on that, but I'm guessing we're just hearing from more business people in this survey that are flying through there. Okay, let's look at it by age groups. So this is interesting. Like I thought we might find something here, and it's definitely right. So look, this tan group, the people that don't do any business travel, that's really big for 70 plus people, folks that are, many of them are probably retired. It's also less, people are traveling for business less in their teens and 20s. Kind of makes sense to me. And then the group that's doing it the most is in their 40s, and then the 50s, and then 30s. And to me, that has a lot to do with kind of career trajectories. So I don't know if you've heard about, like what age people usually peak in their career. So this thing, CNBC data provided by PayScale, was basically showing that people kind of peak in their 40s in their careers. So I'm guessing that this kind of jives with that. Like in your 40s, you're kind of reaching maybe your peak status, you've been promoted, like you have kind of influencer roles. So you're traveling either to close deals or monitor branches or projects. So I think that probably means like you are kind of have a lot of responsibility and therefore you need to travel more than other people do by virtue of like your kind of stage of your career, is my take there. And then, okay, next thing here is like regional travel patterns. So I want to know how often respondents travel to these different areas. So within Idaho, the Northwest, Mountain West, Southwest, the Northwest being Oregon, Washington, Southwest, California, Arizona, Mountain West, Nevada, Utah, Midwest, South, Northeast, New York, or somewhere else. And our respondents are definitely traveling the most in the Northwest, the Mountain West, and the Southwest. So this is, closest areas to where we live. So that makes sense. So there would be kind of more business connections there. I was pretty surprised how low within Idaho is. I don't know if that means people don't have the desire to fly within Idaho or they don't have the options. Because remember, we were just talking about driving and people not having the flights that they want or they need, so they have to drive instead. So instead of taking an hour flight to get from Boise to Lewiston or wherever, I'm not up to date on what all the routes available are. Maybe you would just drive for 4 hours or something like that. I'm guessing there's demand. It's just people that's not supported, so they have to drive. Is my guess. Um, so this is bear with me. This is a really kind of overwhelming chart, but this, and we don't have to go into detail on it, but just know that this is here, and this is showing kind of proportions for these airports for these top 4 regions: Idaho, Northwest, Mountain West, Southwest. And the one that kind of stood out to me is here, we're looking at Boise. These are kind of the proportions for the Boise airport in these regions. People are not flying within Idaho very much from Boise. Even kind of less, almost the least, not like a little bit more than from Salt Lake, but it looks like less than everywhere else, which is interesting to me because they probably have the most within Idaho flight options from Boise. So that's interesting. I'm guessing that people are just, they're going to these other places. We have really high proportions to these other areas. So this is here if you want to kind of see where, if you're in Idaho Falls and you want to check out kind of Mountain West, this one really stands out too. Definitely the most flights going to the Mountain West from Idaho Falls compared to all the other airports for the respondents we heard from. And again, I think that's probably because we're hearing from business people that maybe have, maybe I can't remember what the sample size is, but if we heard from 40 or 50 people from Idaho Falls, maybe 20 of them are in a handful of businesses that do a lot of work in there. So that could be why. But this question is useful not only for kind of who goes where, we can also just calculate how often people go anywhere, because we cover all the possible destinations with these. This is mostly US regions, but then we also have somewhere else. So we can compare the frequencies and come up with what's the, how often are you traveling? You travel within Idaho on a monthly basis, and you don't travel anywhere else, you're still flying on a monthly basis. So you can see here about 80% of our respondents, well, no, that's not valuable, but the basically 95% of our respondents are flying on a yearly basis or more often, and actually approaching 70% are flying on a quarterly or monthly basis. So we've got some frequent flyers here, but we can use this for segmentation on our next question. So we're going to get there. Bear with me. So this is another question I was curious about. Like, pretty much unless you love layovers, those uncomfortable chairs and fatty foods and long lines and crowds, but I do love a good airport smoothie. You probably want to fly nonstop. You don't want to waste time. You want to get where you're going as fast and conveniently as possible. So pretty much everybody would want it, but I was curious how much you want it. How much are you willing to pay extra for that convenience? And the most popular answer here was 20% more. So I was trying to conceptualize that. I was like, okay, if I'm flying to the East Coast and it's $400, that makes it $480. If that's a difference of 3 hours, 4 hours, that feels worth it to me. Some people are would do 50% or more. I need to put my phone back on do not disturb for a couple minutes. Okay. Some people would do 50% or more. That's too rich for me, but over 80% would pay more. So that's pretty interesting to me. I think those people that would pay 50% or more are kind of fancy, pinky out kind of fancy. So I wanted to break this down by airport. Are people willing to pay more for nonstop flights at different airports? And I didn't see anything really shocking here. It doesn't look that different to me across these different categories, so I'm not going to really draw any conclusions or interpretations even on this. So didn't find anything. However, now let's look at like by your percentage of business travel, okay? So I would expect the more business travel you do, the more you're willing to spend extra, because, you know, time is money. You know, if you get there faster, you can close the deal faster, you can get more done, you're less fatigued. You know, it might feel like a good investment. It's worth it. And there was some differences here, but it wasn't really what I thought I was going to see. I thought it was going to be, you know, lots of dark green for all of it and trending like more yellow as we go to the right, and there's less percentage of business travel. But it wasn't really like that. It was in the middle here. It was kind of higher proportions of dark green, people willing to pay more. But there was this group that's like all of it. Again, this is a small group that weren't necessarily willing to pay more for it. They had a bigger group that was like willing to pay a lot, but they had a big group that wasn't willing to pay any. So I was like, maybe what's more important here is not like the percentage of travel, but the amount of travel. So that's where we can use that frequency thing we put together before, like how often you travel. And this is a jackpot view. So this is what I kind of expected to see. And it's the more you travel of this respondent group, the more you travel, the more you're willing to pay. So, you know, more dark green on the left, less dark green on the right. So the more you travel, the more you kind of put up with these travel inconveniences, the more valuable it is for you to skip that whole thing and like get there, get back, get on with your life. So yeah, this one felt satisfying. It's like, okay, there's a trend here, which is about what you'd expect, but I was curious if the data would play that out. So that's case closed, Watson, my dear Watson. Okay, so the next thing we asked was like, okay, if you had a wish from a genie, you can snap your fingers and one nonstop flight was available, the one that you want the most was available at your main airport, what would it be? So here's a word cloud. You know, these are the words, phrases that got used the most in people's selections. But we've got some stuff standing out here. Boise, New York, Atlanta, Idaho Falls, Washington, D.C. These are all standing out. But if you've ever worked with survey data before, this was unstructured. So people spelled things differently, misspelled things, used commas or spaces. So this all needed to be cleaned up and standardized. So I did that, and I was able to calculate the top 10 cities. So the biggest one was New York City. We had almost 100 people vote for that. Now that's less than 10% of the overall, but since like we didn't put this idea in anybody's head really, like it wasn't really like, do you want this, this, or this? The fact that so many people chose that in particular out of anywhere in the world was, you know, I think significant. Then Boise, number 2, Atlanta, major hub, and Washington, D.C. Now, and then there's a really big other group. We had like probably votes for like 500 cities, but these were the ones with the most. But it's not all about cities, because, for instance, Boise is up here, but so is Lewiston. So like turns out there are a lot of like requests for Idaho cities. And if we don't look at the state, we might say, oh, it didn't make the top list, but like it's worth knowing there's a lot of demand to go different places in Idaho, even if each one city isn't in the highest demand. So Idaho demand was highest for direct flights or nonstop flights within Idaho. California was second, New York third. So yes, Idaho. This is making me think like that people are not flying a lot in Idaho, but that's not because they don't want to. They just can't for a lot of reasons from a lot of places, it seems. They would if they could, if this was offered, is my interpretation. Okay, and then the chamber asked several questions. So this is the end of the general questions that apply for the whole state. So the way that Make Idaho Better business model works is like I do these surveys for the whole state, but clients have the option to ask specific questions that are relevant to them. So they wanted to ask about routes that they're considering from Boise, or they're wanting to gauge interest in it from Boise in a few different categories. So they asked about Boise to, and we didn't specify from Boise, but that's what they're particularly interested in, to Idaho Falls, to Coeur d'Alene, Lewiston, Sun Valley, Coeur d'Alene being the most popular, at least from, going to Coeur d'Alene the most popular, but this is people from Boise and elsewhere answering it. Regional flights, Bend, Oregon got the most votes, and then Eugene. Again, the Metro, the Boise Chamber didn't pay for, or hasn't yet purchased custom analysis to show what just Boiseans, how the people that use the Boise airport ranks this, but that's probably what they most want to know. So that's the type of thing that I do for custom analysis. Okay. And then the East Coast destinations, New York, #1, DC, #2, Atlanta, #3. And we saw those in the wish list answers. For other places, Vancouver, British Columbia, go figure, most popular. And then second, Austin, Texas. And those are way above the other ones. Okay. And then the chamber wanted to know where you work, because they would love to follow up with people that answered this so that they can kind of advocate for them with airlines and airports to make their travel more convenient. So here's some keywords there. I didn't do all the categorization yet that I did on the kind of the wish list nonstop. But if somebody wants to pay for custom analysis, I'm more than happy to do that for this too. So that is it. Here's the GIF. Everybody should be happy about this Idaho air travel analysis, like this stewardess is. She's very happy. And then if I always want to say, and we're going to go up to the key highlights in a second. If you ever read an analysis and you're like, no, that's BS. Like, people don't really think that. They just didn't hear from enough people. You could be right. So the answer to that is not to write us off. It's to contribute, to weigh in. If you think, like, if your views are different than what you're seeing here, please subscribe and take our surveys so that your perspective is included, and encourage your friends and family that you think maybe aren't being represented to join as well and to weigh in. The more participation, the better the results, the bigger the positive income. Okay, let's go to the top. Main takeaways from me. If you fly more often, you're more willing to pay more for the convenience of a nonstop flight. If you could snap your finger and have any nonstop flight, New York City was the most popular for a city, but for a state, Idaho, within Idaho, is the most popular. And then if you fly from Boise, you don't necessarily drive as much. You've got more options, or you're flying elsewhere. So that's different than the other airports. And with that, that is all. Stay tuned for our next analyses and surveys. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.